In taking a closer look at the roles both men and women play in modern day society, it seems apparent that things have shifted considerably since the 1950s. The family images we all have typically comes from our parents and grandparents, or from watching reruns of old television series or movies. When we think of shows like I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, or The Donna Reed Show, our minds are filled with stereotypical roles of a wife and mother taking care of the household and cooking, while wearing a dress accessorized by a strand of pearls, while the man goes to work, comes home, watches TV, and smokes a pipe. These visions of ghosts from the past are shattered by today's cultural roles of women in the workplace, military, and politics, while in contrast, men are labeled with terms such as stay-at-home dad, passive, and metrosexual. Are men and women switching roles, or are we breaking through our suppression of social constructs and utilizing our gender characteristics for what they are naturally suited for? In this presentation, we will examine the ever-changing roles of men and women as reflected through fashion, the workplace, and family. This time capsule of information will take us from the 1950s to current day in order to reveal the contrast of how certain gender roles have changed and how they have stayed the same. Our three-person group included classmates Kendra Capron, Martin Pacheco, and Bill Bradshaw.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen.
Of all the new innovations of the 1950s, fashion is a commodity that has transitioned from restriction to a new age freedom felt by men and women in the 21st century. In the 1950s, men and women were bound by their clothing to the essentialist view of conforming to a specific mold that represented the image of generations before them. Women were accustomed to the gendered full skirt, stiff petticoats, pencil slim skirts, and tight sweaters that were usually tucked in at the waist. Women were primarily kept within the confines of the home and were expected to mimic the Barbie dolls that began to emerge at the end of the 50s. Blue jeans were not made acceptable to be worn by females until Marilyn Monroe was photographed in them. Men, on the other hand, were breadwinners in the 1950s families. Much of their hegemonic wardrobe encompassed a variety of suits, which were the common attire for the office place. Weekend attire was a little more comfortable and included easy slip-on shoes. As the 50s progressed, so did the fashion of society. The fashion of the 60s brought about more colors and more synthetic fabrics. Clothing designers decided to start a fashion revolution focused towards younger consumers. Flashy clothing became available at small shops. And Andre Karagas designed the go-go boot. Culottes became popular for leisure wear, and Jackie Kennedy became a fashion icon for many women. The hippie movement encompassed sexes dressing similar. This made it easier to treat women and men as equals because there were no significant differences in the clothing. In the 60s, people began to stand for peace, love, and unity. These political ideas were expressed in rallies, festivals, and sit-ins. The popular film Saturday Night Live helped to encourage men and women to join in on the disco scene. Polyester shirts with color-matching pants became a common theme for many men. Women continued their roles of wearing tightly fitting and revealing clothes with hot pants. Men and women could also be seen wearing platform shoes.
Been working so hard, I'm punching my card. 8 hours for what? Oh, tell me what I got.
In the 80s, shopping malls were plentiful, and little plastic cards could be found in many people's wallets, and the words "Charge it" could be heard throughout the stores. 1984 was coined the Year of the Yuppie by Newsweek magazine. This term was used to label the ever-growing population of career-driven individuals with high standards of living. These people bought expensive products, cell phones, and name brands to show their high standing in society. Men and women wore professional attire, which aided in blurring the lines of hegemonic masculinity, and spent numerous hours with their places of employment. Over the last several decades, it has become apparent that men's and women's fashion has followed the trends of the time periods.
I got work to do. I got work, baby. I got work to do. I got a job, day.
The roles of men and women in the workplace differed considerably over the past 60 years. What was known as a man's world in the 50s and 60s is now a well-rounded, diverse population of both men and women in all aspects of the business world. Illustrating some of the examples of the business culture in the 1950s or the post-World War II era are the following statistics. By 1956, nearly a quarter of all married women were working. Despite that, working women had yet to attain many positions of power. While the women were just beginning to get their feet in the door at the workplace, industrial pioneers like Raymond Albert Kroc joined McDonald's and transformed it into the most successful fast food operation in the world. These trends continued in the 1960s, with women finding their niche in the workplace all over the United States. To reflect these role changes, women were speaking out about the feelings and conditions they were under. One woman wrote,
I was hired in 1965 by a public municipality which employed some 300 people. Supervision was heavy at this time, with little if any latitude for the workers. Time clocks were the norm. Permission was needed to utilize the bathrooms, and we were timed as to how long it took to go to the bathroom and how often we went. After all, most of us were paid by the hour, and they wanted to be certain that we gave them every single minute due. Our work lives were governed by the book. To be a woman in the 1960s workforce, and especially a divorced woman, there were more minefields to be attentive to.
to further illustrate the changes in cultures, another woman wrote,
I was promoted and given the title of manager. It lasted one day. Norm called me into his office with a sour, angry face. He was livid. He told me that the general manager had called him on the carpet for promoting me, a woman, and told to rescind the title or be fired
In
himself.
the 1970s, pop culture was beginning to catch up with the changes of roles in the workplace. Shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show, for the first time, depicted a woman in power in the workplace. Although Lou Grant, her boss, was represented as the more dominant character and the one that was in charge. The 80s and 90s began to see widespread acceptance of the new roles both men and women played in the workplace and politics. From 1979 to 1990, Margaret Thatcher held the position of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She was the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century and is the only woman to have held the office. Men seem to adapt their new roles in business. However, harassment towards women was present in many corporations. The workplace of today is defined by roles of women in power, and the scales of balance are slowly taking place. Although defeated, Hillary Clinton was widely accepted for the position of President of the United States. Interestingly enough, men seem to be now searching for their significance in the workplace, and the realization of equality has come into existence. The roles of men and women has been in constant influx throughout history. The growing pains of gender roles has been especially noticeable over the last 60 years. These changes have redefined the roles of men and women in the family considerably and act as a catalyst of progression in the shaping of the future of our children. The reflection of the roles from the 50s is illustrated in a quote from the book called No Man's Land by Kathleen Gerson. George, a married park maintenance worker, writes, "My father ruled the house. He wouldn't touch a diaper or a dish. He supported the family, and that was it. My father answered to no one. The men were men in those days." The progression of the nuclear family seemed to take a turn in the 1960s, with the women's movement in full swing. Women were burning their bras in protest to inequalities and the feeling of repression they felt from their male counterparts. Men began to feel their patriarch roles begin to slip. According to the book Difference Matters by Brenda J. Allen, the term patriarchy means ruled by fathers. This decade threatened the masculine code, or the idea that men might have to accommodate the needs of women in the family. Women during this time period traded their aprons for picket signs in record numbers. The 1970s continued the family transformation, with women entering the workforce in record numbers, leaving many children left at home to fend for themselves. Divorce rates began to skyrocket during the 70s. The book Masculinity Reconstructed by Dr. Ronald F. Levant states that the divorce rate doubled between 1965 and 1979. The 1980s and 1990s brought a fully redeveloped family model, with women in the workforce in record numbers, while some men chose to stay at home. The movie Mr. Mom that came out in 1983 illustrates this new model of family roles. Women were now given full permission without guilt to work outside the home, while men, on the other hand, were faced with the adaptation of playing a more nurturing role with their children. Divorce continued to threaten the family and once again challenges the roles men and women played. The proverbial pendulum begins to swing the other way in favor of women. This is especially true when it comes to children and custody battles. Today we catch up to the changes that have occurred in the past and carefully examine social gender constructs and figure out where we've landed. Have we gone too far? Have we gone far enough? Those are the questions that must be answered. Dr. Ronald F. Levant writes in his book Masculinity Reconstructed, "The state of masculinity is in crisis." He explains this is due to the social changes wrought by the feminist movement and the influx of women into the workforce, and how it has left our traditional code of masculinity in a state of collapse. Although some might argue that men have turned into subservient puppy dogs, it is our observation that there seems to be more of a balanced system in place in the family unit. This newfound cohesion seems to be improving the overall culture of modern-day society for the better.